Welcome to Missionary Roundtable with your host, Kale Horvath.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Missionary Roundtable, the podcast all about the Great Commission and international missions. My name is Kale Horvath. I'm a pastor and missionary to the country of Hungary. And this is a special episode because it is the season finale of season 3 of Missionary Roundtable podcast. I'm so glad that you guys joined. If you've never listened to another episode, hey, go back and listen to some other ones. But this is definitely a special one. It's a little bit longer than some of the others. Had a great conversation with a close friend of mine that I'm excited for you guys to hear. On this episode, we're talking to Pastor Matt Braucher, who's a church planner in the United States, not on the international field. Matt and I grew up in, well, he's older than I, you'll see that, but we grew up in our training and our ministry together, served on staff at First Baptist Church in New Philly, Ohio together, and we're both sent out the same month, in fact, December of 2020. I was sent to Budapest, Hungary, and he was sent to Columbus, Ohio, only a couple hours away. So a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, and we just have a chat about his story and how God used and prepared him. But then also we got to compare and contrast some of the similarities and differences of moving away to do a church planning work on the international field versus doing it in the U.S. And so I think it's going to be really encouraging and edifying to you, especially if you aspire to be a church planner someday, regardless of if it's in America or on the foreign field. And so I think you're going to like it. So have a listen, and I hope you enjoy. All right, Matt. So good to catch up with you again, man. It's been we try to have a Zoom call and catch up every couple months or so, see how each other's doing. Good to talk to you again, man. Thanks for taking time. I know you're busy.
Yeah, man, it's a privilege to be a part of this. I know I've been encouraged in the past listening. So, I'm humbled to be asked to be a part of it. I'm glad to be an encouragement to anybody if possible. And I'm excited to be here. I always look forward to catching up with you. So if this serves that purpose alone,
same.
I'm happy to be a part. So
yeah, absolutely, man. And I thought this would be a good episode for this season because usually we're talking about international missions, but I always intro the podcast by saying like this is a podcast all about the Great Commission and international missions. But of course, if we're just looking at Acts 1:8 model, I know a lot of churches might use Acts 1:8 as a model for like mission support, like financially, which is fine. But really, if we're looking at it as just a model of an individual local body reaching the world, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost. And we both come from New Philly, First Baptist Church. So, I mean, New Philly is our Jerusalem. You could say Ohio is like our Samaria. The whole U.S. could be our Samaria. Sorry, I missed Judea. Ohio could be like our Judea. Samaria could be like our country, and then obviously the uttermost. And so, so our church is trying its best to reach the whole world from little old New Philly, Ohio. And so, you and I don't want to say grew up together because you're about 10 years older than me. But we did. Like, I grew up in this church since I was born. You came and got saved when you were a college student. I don't want to tell your whole story, but basically we were trained in our church, and then we served together, served on staff together, were ordained together, got sent out really similar times. But I went to another country, and you went down I-70 a couple hours to Columbus. And so...
Right.
Very similar training stories anyway, maybe not salvation stories, very similar training stories, very different missions that we were sent to, yet also very similar. So I would love to talk to you about stateside church planning, and maybe we can compare and contrast because you've been there at your church, Northside Baptist in Columbus, for about as long as I've been here in Hungary, I think, right? Give or take a few months.
Yeah, we left New Philly it was 2 days after Christmas. So it was December 27th.
So a couple weeks after we went to Hungary.
Yeah, a couple
of
weeks.
December
2020.
10th.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
we virtually the same amount of time.
brand new in 2021. So we've been going for about a year and a half here.
That's awesome. So I think we can like compare and contrast a lot of things between stateside church planning and international missions, but also just like some of the behind the scenes stuff of emotions and feelings and leaving home and some of that kind of stuff. But before we get into that, do you want to share just a little bit about your testimony, how you got saved, ended up at FBC, and then I think it's a cool story. Like, this doesn't have to be a super detailed story, but just how you went from being just a normal guy who was serving in church, faithful guy, engineer. All my friends in New Philly are engineers. I don't know why. Every single guy I'm surrounded by, I'm the creative. They're all engineers. Learn a lot from them. It's good to have a lot of friends as engineers if you're a creative, because you get to learn a lot. But how do you go from that guy to then being a pastor on staff at the church you were saved at, to then being sent out to plant a church in Columbus?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. You want me to start with salvation testimony?
Yeah. Why don't you tell? Because you were a college guy when you got saved, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was working at a local grocery store. It's called Bueller's. There's only a few of those around. But yeah, I was the dairy and frozen guy. So I just worked back there by myself most of the time. But there was some other friends that worked there as well that were my age. They kept inviting me to church. I had grown up in a charismatic church, and a lot of messed up doctrine there. Wasn't saved, didn't fully understand, or never had made that decision completely to where I understood what it meant, and experienced that from that point on, life was different. It was still just, it was just selfish every single time that I would ask the Lord to save me. But it just was missing the substance of, an actual surrender and a transition. So anyways, I had made some friends at work. They kept inviting me to stuff. I kept, kind of blowing them off, saying, I've got a church, but I didn't go. It was just my excuse for them to not talk to me about,
of course.
Jesus. And so it was just it was just that thing, just kind of riding through life, doing my thing, completely selfish, completely empty. And finally, they talked me into coming to a couple of events that the singles group was doing, and I would go. They'd share the gospel, and I was like, man, that sounds like what I've heard. But I would just, it
wasn't foreign to you, the church world. Church lingo.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. So the I knew a lot of the church stories. I knew a lot of Bible stories. I knew a lot of. I would say the church that I grew up in had a legitimate presentation of the gospel. It was it just had all these weird strings attached.
Gotcha.
And so they wouldn't have had a requirement of signs as proof and all of that kind of thing, but they also tied a whole lot of things to it. And then the lack of eternal security was just nothing but confusion. And so no one could tell you what you would lose your salvation for. You just were convinced you constantly lost.
You just have a constant fear of losing it for everything.
Yeah, so living that way, it's possible that I got saved as a kid, but there was never any growth. There was never growth whatsoever. So, generally when I share my testimony, I would just share when I came to FBC the first few times, I was so convicted. I didn't even know what to do with myself. The first time I came was a Christmas service, and I just convinced myself that it was just all of the production that they put into the service. They did a good job of, and I hate sales, so don't try to sell me. Like I was that.
Did Frank sing "Mary Did You Know" back then?
Oh, absolutely.
Nice.
Of course.
Man, those were the
they even had a full-on play, dude, where the guy was hanging on the cross.
How old were you back then?
I would have been 20, 21.
Okay. Okay.
So
I would have been there. I just would have
22, 23 years ago.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it was, I was just so convicted that I didn't go back for a while.
Wow. Yeah.
But I would go to some of the events and whatever. And finally, I went back a few times in the spring. I believe it was, I can't even remember, 99, 2000, something like that. And Pastor Mark Trotter was going through a communion service. And I was so convicted, and I had been faking it for so long that finally, during that service, I just gave up. I surrendered.
Bro,
I was empty. I was trying to fill.
It wasn't 2001, was it?
No, it wasn't
Okay,
2001.
because 2001 in a communion service that Mark preached at our church was when I got saved. So that
Yeah,
that
right,
would
very
be crazy
similar.
if it was this. I mean, I was 10, but
What seat was it?
yeah, well, it was it
Which
was
pew?
close to the front, yeah, in the
Yeah,
middle.
same. I remember, standing there with my friends, and the guy and his mom was right next to us, and I just remember sitting down and just surrendering,
Wow.
giving up. Finally, like, I know that cars don't fill the void. I know that the job doesn't fill the void. I know that girls, like all of these things that I was pursuing only made me feel worse. And so I finally just said, I'm tired of faking it. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of, all of that. And so I just a normal guy, had my engineering job already, and just gave up. And so it was in that service that I got saved. And, I almost immediately realized how much money I was throwing away, and cars and just stupid things. And so I just started making decisions to be a better steward of what God had given me. And I didn't have a clue. I wasn't even yet being discipled necessarily. And so as that started coming on, it was just like, one thing after another that the Lord was saying, okay, well, your life doesn't really line up here. What are you going to do about it? And so none of this was or is a pat on my back that I'm just such this, wonderful Christian. It's interesting how we as Christians want to take credit for surrender. Like, that's not a thing you get to take credit for. You gave up, you stopped,
And it's
you
actually
quit,
what you're
down.
supposed to do.
Right. But because it's what we're supposed to do, we tend to want to pat ourselves on the back or find somebody else that's really good at it and say, man, you're the most humble guy I know. And they say, yeah, I know. Aren't I amazing? So it's weird because it comes across as like this false humility, but that was what God was doing in my life initially. It was just one thing after another. This doesn't line up, Matt. What are you going to do? I'm going to do the same.
The next step. What's my next step of growing?
Yes.
In the Lord.
So that progressed. I met Jenny, my wife, there. We got married. We had kids. We served whatever needed done. We served in children's ministry for about 9.5 years. At first, it was like first grade through fifth grade, and then we split that up because it was chaos. So then eventually we were first, second, and third grade.
There's crowns in heaven for you, man, doing a decade of children's ministry. Good. Praise God.
It was some tough sledding at times, but it was
at a
good.
tough point in our church's history too. It wasn't
sure,
and we don't really have time for that full story, but it was during a transition between senior pastors, and just not an easy time for any church.
Right. Yeah, and so we just kind of stuck that out and started having kids. I would say, going back to that time, that I wasn't walking very close with the Lord for a time. It wasn't like there was, deep immoral sin and problems and corruption. It's just gotten to a place where life was so busy and parenting was busy and my job. And so those are not good excuses, but they were the reasons to why I was so distracted or just going through the motions. I guess
you get in like a rut, like work, family, church, and wash, rinse, repeat, and then you find yourself not feeling spiritually fulfilled. Not even fulfilled, but like you said, not feeling like you're just going through the motions. Right.
And so then, my son Weston will be 11 this summer, and it was the summer leading into him being born, and he was coming along. I've got 2 girls at that point, and there was just something God did in my heart, and just kind of sort of asking me, hey man, what are you going to do to lead your son? What are you going to do to show him how to be a man? What do I could excuse and say, well, Jenny's a great mom and a great wife and a great woman. The girls are going to be okay.
They'll be great.
I'm not going anywhere, whatever. I'm not a deadbeat dad.
Yeah.
But
that's the standard really, for raising good girls, by the way. It's just not leaving. It's a
well, yeah,
no,
my I never knew him. So,
Right, yeah. So that, I mean, that was the role model you had in your life.
I was a
Absolutely.
stellar
Yeah.
example compared to what I had. Anyways,
Sure.
it's pretty lame. I get it. But like God really used the fact that I was about to have a son to get a hold of my heart and ask me why, when I first started walking with him, was there this consistent pattern of things he would confront me with and I would let go of. And now somehow my life consisted of everything that I was holding on to. And that's, I mean, maybe the best way that I can,
So it's like the growth was steady for a long time and then maybe just plateaued or got stagnant.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the busyness of life.
Yeah. And so again, it wasn't a bunch of sin. I was a sinner and I'm sure I was sinning.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I'm not denying that, but like, it wasn't that I was like off doing something terrible. It was just that I wasn't walking consistently with the Lord. I wasn't allowing his word to confront me. I wasn't even getting into the word consistently.
Gotcha.
And so it was just going through the motions. And when Jeff came along and he started establishing things and leadership opportunities and growth and training, that was like the same time. You were in the first year of MTT. I ended up signing up for the second year.
Okay.
I was watching from a distance and realizing, man, I'm going through the motions and I'm some sort of quote unquote leader in the church. And it's just not acceptable. And so God's using these different things in my life to ask me questions, as I believe he tends to do. And I'm a guy who I just need blunt, very honest, hard questions, and I'm fine with it. It's just information. So this is an engineering benefit. You can ask me questions that should offend me, and I don't care. It's fine. Nice. Just ask the questions. I need to assess that information. Whether you're right or wrong or opinionated or not, there's probably some truth in it. So I want to at least hear it.
That's awesome.
And so this is the way I hear God. Maybe this is why, people do or don't appreciate how I talk about things. But God was just asking me, why now are you hanging on to everything when you used to consistently just lay it down? And so that was heading into that summer, and I was late to sign up for MTT. I had called the office and said, hey, I know it's late. I know I missed the deadline. Is there any chance I can get in? And, Jeff, thankfully he let me in. It was great. But I got in there.
Which is our church's 2-year ministry training. Yeah, which is a predecessor to Bible Institute. Yeah.
Perfect. Yep.
After personal discipleship, before Bible Institute. Yep.
So when I got in there were a few things early on that just showed me that the tone of what we were doing in that class was to be taken serious. And that's exactly what I did.
I agree. Yeah. The first time.
Exactly what I did. Yeah. And so when I started to take the investment in myself serious that Jeff was providing and some other guys, and I really started to feel a few things that I hadn't felt in a while. Some of that being, when I first got saved, I felt early on that God had a different plan for me than engineering. But, I was an engineer for 17 years. Wow. So it wasn't a quick path. It wasn't an overnight thing. And in the middle of that was some of this, time of just going through life and doing things. And so then God brings MTT and Jeff and all of these things into my life. And I start really putting, effort and energy into it. And I start feeling again, like, I wonder why I'm still an engineer. I think God has more for me. So this is one thing, when you were mentioning how similar our paths were, I think it's interesting when I listened to your story and you knew from an early age, youth ministry, man, I'm going towards that. You've got a trajectory. You've got a target.
At least a goal to shoot for. Yeah,
right. Right. And then early in that process, even, I think God's calling us to missions. And so now you've got another goal and you're working your way through that. Me, man, I'm just happy to be around and get along.
It's along for the ride, man.
And I want to do what God wants me to do. It's just never been clear and in front of me. And so it has always kind of been that God would bring something to me and say, hey, I want to deal with this. Okay, here's an opportunity. I want you to do this. There's no reason for you to say no to this. You might as well say yes to it. Go ahead and do it. It's been that kind of
There's a
process.
theme in your life of just always, here's the next step. Maybe not necessarily a vision for 10 years down the road, but like God presents the next step. It's like walking. It's walking by faith. He gives us his word is a lamp unto our feet. Reveal the next couple of feet and steps, not necessarily the next couple miles.
Exactly. And you may look at, an engineer type person and say, well, that's kind of surprising. I would think you would have a 5-year, a 10-year, or whatever plan. But where the engineering comes into play is this is facts, and you've already presented true things to me. And so I'm going to stick with the truth. If God has presented it and it's true, then I need to consider that.
Gotcha.
So I don't have the long-term plan, but I can come back to the stuff that God's already established and say, okay, well, I need these principles in the next thing.
Yeah.
I need these principles in the next thing.
You know what,
so
though? It's interesting.
It's not a thing to where I have to get emotional and work through anything. He already said what he said.
So because you're a super logical, engineering-minded guy. And I know not all engineers are created equally, but that does seem to be almost a personality trait, or
what came first?
A kind of brain. Yeah. And so so you were engineer for 17 years, and God slowly, you're taking the next step when God reveals it, but God's slowly working in you. You didn't ever make an abrupt decision. It's just interesting to me because I have so many friends. I mean, I could rattle their names off right now, but the guys I'm talking about. Guys on staff at FBC, guys not on staff. All of these guys, my friends, all different ages. And most of them, I don't know if it's an engineer thing or if it's just the engineers I know, they don't make decisions quickly. They take time. I'll just throw out Nick Roth as the prime example of but even Jeff, I learned a big thing from him in ministry because Jeff was an engineer long before he was a pastor. One thing I learned from him is not to react too quickly in ministry when something good or bad happens. Just let it play out and have patience, seek the Lord, and just see. And a lot of things, time will answer a lot of questions. And so, but I don't know if it's an engineer thing or if it's just all the guys that I know. It's okay, I see this set of data or numbers or facts. Now let's just think about them, assess them, analyze them, and then we will make a decision. But it doesn't, I feel like I'll see something and I'll be like, okay, let's do it. Right now, we got to go, which can be good, but a lot of times isn't good. Was that part of your personality in this gradual shift towards doing ministry, or was it just the way that God revealed it to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of it's personality. I think some of it's conditioning. I was mentioning, what came first, the engineer or the engineering career? Was I engineering minded and that's why I found that career, or did it kind of condition me to think differently?
Gotcha.
Because I really do, and I see this in my son a little bit too, it's not the Matrix, but you're seeing patterns in everything. When I study the Word, I'm looking for patterns. When I'm reacting to something, I'm going to react based on patterns. I don't overreact when one thing bad happens. I try not to, because I have a series of one. I don't know if it's a pattern. I don't know if there's a problem. I don't know if we need to change anything because it only happened once.
There's not enough data to establish a consistent pattern. So once I
have something happen concurrently, repeated over time, then it's okay, well, we should be learning from this.
Interesting.
There should be something changed, or this is a good thing. Let's keep doing what we're doing. That's been successful. And so that can be, there's definitely drawbacks to that. It is a slow process. But I think God has genuinely used that in what I'm a part of right now, because when you're building people, God can do anything as fast as he wants to. We generally kind of think of God as really slow and really patient. Well, the reason he's really slow and really patient is because he's using us. And we're really slow to change. We're really slow to grasp things. We're really slow. When you have an entire church of different personalities and experiences and all of the things that, I'm seeking to lead right now, man, I can communicate like an engineer and a few people in the body get it. Mm-hmm. But there's other people that need more repetition. Mm-hmm. And there's other people that need me to be by their side so that they can understand that I care, so that they can hear what I say. It's so different when you're talking about an entire body. When it's just me and my buddies, we can be on whatever pace we want to be on. Mm-hmm. But the body it's a slow process to make advancements and for people to get a vision and a lot of repetition. And I used to think, I don't think I can repeat myself that much. I don't think I can be a pastor because I get irritated when I have to repeat myself.
And then you became a dad.
Yeah. And then God said,
like, oh yeah, I can say the same thing 100 times.
It's not that bad. It's like this, but different.
Turn the light off if you're not in the room.
I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how my mind processes things. And God has used me, or he's used events in my life because he knows how my mind is messed up, or however it works. If it works, he knows how to communicate to me. And it's been something that I think has been a big help as things aren't necessarily taking shape or taking form that I would hope they had by this point, in a year and a half, So I think it's been interesting just to kind of watch what's going on. I may feel rushed to do something, but God keeps reminding me, hey, I'm doing something else. You don't need that yet. You're not even ready for that.
Sure.
Maybe a good example would be, we've been looking for a building since we got down here. We've been renting a space. We're meeting on Sunday evenings. It's been great.
And your church has been official. I mean, you did your charter membership service, about a year ago?
Yeah, it was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2021.
Oh, okay. So
it was our initial
over a year.
Yeah. So I figured we'd
still renting a place.
Take that holiday and give it some real meaning. But it was a fun time. So yeah, we've been pushing along pretty much at the same place. Like when it was a Bible study, before it was a church, we met at a few different places, but we've been at the same building, renting from another church for that entire time. And so I felt the pressure right away, man, we got to find our own place.
Sure.
I keep hearing, the numbers will increase, this will increase. We'll have, we'll have more. Isn't that my responsibility as the pastor to provide the best scenario and the best place so that we can have as many people and make as big of an impact? And all of this stuff is just things you're feeling as you go. And we're going through the Gospel of Mark, and we get to the Mark chapter 4, and I'm studying. It's the parable of the sower, and there's a soil that's shallow, and the plants grow really fast there. But there's no connection to the source of life. There's no roots.
There's no root.
And the very thing in connection with that water that's supposed to help a plant grow is what fries it. And that's the sun scorched that plant. And so as I'm studying, God is just saying to me, hey, Matt, just why don't you slow down?
Yeah.
Because I need to make sure that Northside is growing roots right now. And so
that's
at one point,
really hard thing to learn is because it's funny because we're on completely different sides of the world, but it's the same thing here. Obviously we have to learn a language on top of it, but the foundational part of ministry, you have to go slow because you're building men. Like even if you're building a real building, I think I talked about this with Jeff a little bit on the episode we did with him, where when we were building the Next Gen Center, it took forever to get started because they're testing the ground and the dirt and pouring the footers, and it took forever to get the foundation poured. But then when it was done, the building flew up fast after that. But you got to take time to get that foundation right, even if you feel pressure from outside sources to rush it. And that can be from people telling it, or even from my experience, just seeing other ministries or other people and be like, man, should we be moving faster? And you have to like trust what you feel God is telling you as the man of God in the area that he's placed you in. So I can totally relate, man.
Yeah. And Jeff and I would have talked, Jeff and Troy and we would have talked about, man, this thing's gaining momentum. I don't know anything about surfing, but I think you're supposed to be on the front of the wave to keep riding that thing.
Sure.
So there's a momentum.
And that's fair.
You need to be in the right position. You need to be ahead of things. You need to be, all of these things. So I'm feeling this pressure naturally. Well, this is part of that, but it actually wasn't. God's showing me differently. I'm growing roots here. And if you guys aren't even healthy enough to handle more people. Why don't you just let me grow the people you have? You just keep repeating yourself. You keep sticking with the stuff and let me grow them. And then when it's time, we'll get you a building, we'll get you a spot, we'll get you a Sunday morning, whatever, fill in the blanks. And honestly, like I look back when we first started, we were looking at spaces probably a third of the size of the amount of people we have right now. Like we would have put a ceiling on our growth so early that we wouldn't have been able to handle who we were.
You would have had a place, but it would have instantly been.
Yeah, we would have been in 2 and 3 services immediately.
Wow.
And so the other aspect is, okay, if you don't have mature, stable believers, what's your children's ministry going to look like? How many of those people that are going to come in to visit are ever going to come back? Because you may preach the truth from the pulpit, but nobody else there does yet. The church isn't preaching the truth yet. The church hasn't gotten, and this is not an indictment on anybody that's a part of our church, and it may come across very maybe self-centered. I'm not trying to say that anybody's not there, but it's a slower process than I even imagined. We've gotten some different people from different churches because of COVID shutdowns. We got a lot of people that know a lot of Bible, know a lot of church, and have been in that for a long time, but they don't or haven't until recently starting to see some steps take place to where, okay, now it looks like some people are catching the vision. It's been a year and a half, and we're just starting to catch the vision. So if it would have been a traditional church plant, I would have come down here. We would have tried to win a few people to Christ, and it would take a long time to win some, train them, win some more, train them, win some more. Well, what we started with was a group of people that knew a lot of Bible, but the vision wasn't in place. And the vision wasn't necessarily even bought into, and it's beginning to get to that place to where it's getting exciting. Oh, and it's probably going to take just as long. It's just a different approach, and so you're dealing with perspectives of church and what ministry really is, biblically, versus what everybody believes it is because they've had certain experiences.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't necessarily your strategy. I mean, it's not like you're like, this is the way we're going to start our church. Because I feel like that is a lot of guys who decide that or feel called to be church planners. I should say it that way. I'm not trying to dog anyone. Stateside church planners, they will decide or feel that calling before there's any opportunities presented to them possibly. Right. And so then they develop a strategy or a philosophy or they get trained or whatever, and then they go out ready to do that. Whereas yours was a little bit different because of your personality, because how God has brought you along. The opportunity showed itself before God revealed the man who was going to go do it. Right. And so that makes some things unique, but I also think is potentially the better way. If God reveals where he's working and then we just join him, or then the church as a body then asks God, okay, who's the man to do this? Do you want to go back into that a little bit? So eventually you came on staff. I mean, okay, we'll fast forward a little bit. That's a cool story too, but I'll summarize for you because I know this story a little bit. It was really neat how Matt's just plugging along, being faithful, training, taking the next step, and then Jeff wanted to hire another guy on staff, and he asked Matt to have coffee or lunch or something, and Matt thinks that Jeff's going to ask him what his opinion is and who he thinks he should hire. Matt and his either his humility or his engineering naivety, I don't know. But
not clueless. I was clueless. You can go with that.
But then Jeff is like, "No, man, I think maybe you're the guy." And why don't you talk about that for a second? What was that like for you? Did you see that coming at all, or was it completely blindsided?
No, that was a complete blindside. So we had transitioned out of children's ministry, and I was leading a life group. We call it Family Life. That's right. And so you had a weekly teaching slot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a consistent teaching spot, and it was, I think, being an engineer, Jeff was hoping to get somebody who was project manager minded, because we had a ton of projects at the church that needed done, physical projects on the property. And so a
lot of administrative and organization.
Yeah. So that part
even
made
discipleship,
sense.
you wore that hat for a while, organizing.
Yeah. That wasn't until later, but yeah, I mean, It's initially, honestly, I didn't see it coming at all. Like one of the things Jeff asked me early on, like in the interview process, after I had started considering it, was, what training do you think you need or whatever? I was like, oh, public speaking. He's like, really? I was like, yeah, it scares me to death. I hate it. I want nothing to do with going
Nice.
up on the big stage. Like I didn't even like teaching in front of the kids when I first started because there was other adults in the room. The kids didn't scare me. It's just
Right.
everybody else is going to find out what a phony I am, and it's just going to be bad, And so it was, some of that's selfish. It's insecurities. It's whatever. But that was a big concern of mine. Was just getting in front of people and preaching and all of that. And so I just remember my perspective of a pastor being that being more of a key part of it, as opposed to all that takes place behind the scenes, just ministering to people. Mm-hmm. Right. It was maybe just a little naive as far as the scope of other things that are necessary to do the work of the ministry, basically. Mm-hmm. So that being my perspective, I absolutely did not see it coming. I didn't see that would ever be a thought in anybody's mind. But being completely transparent, I always thought God had something else. I just didn't know what it was. Right. I assumed, Steve Roth, what a great guy. Mm-hmm. He used to say, man, you're going to make a good deacon someday. Well, I'd never been a deacon, so I missed my opportunity. Maybe, I don't know, but like I just thought, man, I want to contribute to the church however God trains me and equips me to do so. Yeah, whatever's needed, that's what I want to do, and that'll be better for everybody because
you're filling you're filling your role in the body. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 12.
And so that's just what it always was, and I never had an aspiration or a goal or anything to where I would have gone to Jeff and said, "Hey, man, train me for this."
Sure.
It was just what my pastors were seeing in me.
And praise God for that, right?
And it matched the need, and yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes our pastors and our leadership see things in us that we don't see, for good or for bad. Honestly, positive and negative, and especially I know you weren't a younger guy, but when you are a younger guy, you got to trust your leadership that they are. Right. On behalf of God, the authorities in your life, and they are looking out for your best interest, and they want to see you used for the sake of the body and for God. So yeah, praise God that he saw those things. And then you came on staff at FBC as a pastor. And how long were you there before planting Northside?
So I came on staff in 2014. Mm-hmm. And then we left at the very beginning of 2021.
7 years, something like that.
Yep.
Awesome. So what was man. I came on staff in 2015, so we were together for several years. And then that whole time that I was on staff as the youth pastor, I was also going to Hungary like every year, once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. And that was always something that was like a maybe in the future. And like Jeff would talk to me occasionally, like, what are you thinking? And I had like real goals and plans for our youth department at FBC that needed work. Our youth department was not in shambles when I came in, but it needed vision and it needed structure, and we moved buildings. And so I was a little bit of the not the cleanup guy. I was just my role in the youth department in my little bit of time at FBC was the come in and new vision, new building, new just a lot of new things that had to be set up so that the next guy could take them and then roll on forward. And it was a lot of fun.
Foundation.
But that whole time I'm thinking about, what God had given me a burden years ago for missions and then potentially Hungary. And so there came a time where it became evident that the youth department was ready and it didn't need me anymore. And then, Jeff's like, okay, well, what do you think? And so it became very evident. It was always a background conversation for me, and that's how I was eventually sent out. But you, again, different personality, and not only personality, but God's just working in you the way that he worked with you. It was a gradual thing, and it was never, like you said, like a goal to be attained, but it seems like, I don't want to give you your own theme for your life. But the theme that I'm seeing is like, what's the next step? And just take the next step in your walk, in your faith.
Yeah. Like my life's theme is probably like 3 feet ahead. That's all the further I can see. I can see 3 feet ahead.
Sure.
And I know what the next step is.
But a lot of people can only see 3 feet ahead, and then they still take the wrong step, though. It's like, God shows it to you. You got to take that step in order to get to the one after that,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty consistent.
So how did that process go then whenever God was revealing that there was a work in Columbus, and then, the work revealed itself before God revealed who should go do it? I think that's interesting.
So we were all going down as a church, several of us pastors, to take turns leading a Bible study. And the Bible study kind of looked like a church service. We had some worship songs and we preached.
Yeah,
It was more the study that we had done.
There was a handful of people there. I mean, more than a handful of people.
Yeah,
there was a good amount
honestly,
of people.
it started with 45 people and it held consistent through the summer. There was maybe 1 week where there was, low 30s, but it was very consistent, and there was definitely an interest and a hunger and a lack of a shepherd. And so, like much of my life and my family's life, that information didn't come along until it became obvious. Okay, there's a group of people in need of a shepherd, and there's no shepherd, and we have, Jeff and Troy would have said, hey, by the way, you're the guy. We're not going to make you go. You need to figure out if God wants you to go, but we don't have anybody else ready right now. Kale's going overseas. We think you're the guy. And so this would have been very similar to Jeff just asking me to come on staff. It was I see something in your life that you clearly aren't seeing. Here's a need, and here's what God's prepared you for. And yes, it's above your pay grade, but that's what God does. He's going to bring you into something that you're going to be required to lean on him and depend on him to do this. But you're not a novice to get started. Basically.
And so obviously in both instances asked you, he wasn't telling you what to do. It's just like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And I think this is what the Lord is showing. So now you go pray. Obviously you have to arrive at the same conviction and conclusion.
Yes. And so now I'm looking at new information to me and presenting it to my wife and eventually the kids, and we're praying about it. And God used my wife and kids to confirm that in a lot of ways. But it was cool to work through it together. And again, we're just looking at new information and assessing what is there. And then it was interesting because there was kind of one message that I shared, and I think I shared this on Theology Roundtable. It was just as I'm preaching to the folks in Columbus, in the middle of the message, man, I almost broke down because it was obvious that I was done leading the college ministry in New Philly, if nothing else.
That's
like
hard,
God revealed, hey, by the way, I'm done with you there. I don't need you there. And so as on the car ride back, I'm talking to Troy. I'm like, hey, man, if I don't do the well anymore, what do I do? And we're just kind of talking through it. And I said, don't tell anybody, but I think the Brauchers are heading to Columbus. I think that was the statement. I got to figure this out.
Though? It's
but
like,
I think God made it obvious in the midst.
He showed you that you fulfilled. You fulfilled what he asked you to do. You fulfilled, take heed that you fulfilled the ministry. And it's just because it was similar for me, man. I knew he gave me the vision or the burden for Hungary a while ago, but I didn't know I was ready until he revealed to me, they don't need you anymore here. And you fulfilled what and that's hard. That's hard to swallow because that's the point. That's the way you start out is like, let's make this and train men so that they don't need me someday. But then when that day comes, you're like, man, that's still, because it's been your baby for the last however many years, and change, especially for my engineering-minded friends, isn't always easy. It's not easy for anyone. And it can be scary.
Yeah. So it was a good time, and it's very similar to the point I was making, in reference to Mark chapter 4. When God speaks to you and says, hey, man, quit worrying about this thing, or he makes a change and say, hey, you're done with this thing. In one aspect, it's convicting, or it's sad, it's difficult. But on the other hand, man, what a burden he lifted off my shoulders to say, hey, it's okay. Don't be in such a rush on this thing. Just do what you're supposed to do. I'm working on something else. And
Gotcha.
that was a cool thing too. Okay, you're done here, but I've got a plan for you still. You're not being removed because of failure.
Yeah, right. I'm not done
Actually,
with
I have
you.
another guy for that now.
Yeah.
And we don't have to replace you because you messed up. We have to replace you because you're done. You have to move elsewhere. And if you don't get out of the way, then this guy can't do what I want him to do.
And that is another great byproduct of sending guys out to do other works, is that it creates a vacuum for other men and women to step up into roles that are now vacant. And maybe in some cases they wouldn't have gotten that opportunity had you not left. And so I think that's also part of God's plan too, for, making every member in the body of Christ a servant and not just a pew sitter. Sure.
Yeah. So it's been interesting just the way that has developed. And again, I don't know if that's tied to the engineering mind or God knows that's the only thing I can hear.
Yeah. Praise the Lord, man.
If he packages it a certain way.
So you guys, you eventually, you're praying a long time, you agree with God, the family agrees, and you're packing up and you're going to go right after Christmas, 2020 to move down to Columbus.
I don't recommend that either, but
I don't actually. Yeah. I also don't recommend leaving home in December of 2020. So don't do that if you're listening. I guess you can't do that. So that's not easy. But I want to talk about this a little bit. I'd love to compare and contrast our story. So we both left at the same time to do church planting works, but completely different contexts. I was going, however far away, to Europe, to Hungary. You were going a couple hours away by car down the highway to Columbus. Both of us leaving a very small town, Midwestern town that I love, by the way. I still love. I'm not the guy I'm not the college kid who was dying to leave the small town and go to, I love New Philadelphia, still do. Right. But we both left a small town where we were comfortable and went to big cities, completely different cultures, completely different contexts than what we're used to. And then I would love to talk to you. We've talked about this in private before, because I knew it was going to be hard to leave. I grew up at that church since I was born, 30 years. Family was in New Philly, but my church was my family. And so I knew leaving was going to be hard. Going to Hungary was going to be difficult. And it was still difficult and more hard, even though I knew it was going to be, But I think for you guys, if you don't mind talking about this a little bit, just because I think it's interesting, is that kind of blindsided you a little bit, because you're like, well, we're not going that far away.
Yeah, it was a little bit mixed up also because of COVID and our kids were leaving a school where they were in person.
And you had older kids as well. Yeah. Which we didn't.
Yeah, so the factors are, I don't know that I can necessarily, here we go again. I don't know that I can pinpoint exactly what all was going on. There was a lot of things playing into the struggle. Some of it was the COVID. We came down here and they were or on Zoom every class all day, every day. They never went in person until the school year was almost up. And then when it was up, towards the end, they were going to class twice a week, but they weren't allowed to be within 6 feet of anybody. So they couldn't interact.
Yeah,
it was insane, but they really struggled. And we thought, we're just 2 hours down the road. We'll go back, we'll visit, we'll whatever. And it didn't pan out that way. And it wasn't as easy. And it actually, somewhere along the line, we realized it actually probably wasn't good to go back a lot.
Sure.
There needed to be a separation at some point, because Columbus is home. New Philly's not home anymore. Now look, same as you. I love New Philly. It's a great place. I would probably go back if this wasn't of the Lord and it was just my business decision, we'd probably go back. Right?
Sure.
It's not the big city, small town thing for me. I don't even like to leave my living room. So I just like what's just in the same, whatever. But Columbus is home. And the people here are this is our field. This is our mission field. This is where we belong.
You've bought that.
It feels like that now. We go to New Philly now to visit family. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, it's a 2-hour drive home, but it's so good to be home. It's so good to be in my living room, go to bed in my bed, be with my family, our neighbors, our church body. Like we went to FBC not too long ago. I think it might've been Easter. And I was like, this is cool. I love being back and visiting, but I'm thinking about Northside, and I'm thinking about our body, and I'm thinking about what do we need, and you know, so-and-so is going through this hardship, and so it's been good, and I think that was a necessary reality to come to, was we have to relocate emotionally.
Yeah, no, seriously.
And part of I think what helped and continues to help is just reminding my kids that I didn't get sent to Columbus and they had to go. You know, I've had people tell me that, you know, your poor kids, they got drug along. Yeah, in some aspects, they didn't have a choice. But it's because we as a family, if God presents us with something, we're going to do what God wants us to do. And so it's not just me, though. We've had this discussion just recently. Lila had some friends she got to take to go to camp with her. Phenomenal opportunity. Lila, there's no way that me being sent down here could meet your friends and then interact with their families and have gospel opportunities with the families in Columbus. God sent the Brauchers as a unit. We're a family. You know, I have a specific role in the church, but we have a role in this field. You know, so it's been helpful to really just kind of buy that completely and not look back to what we left behind and what, you know, some of the girls that they go back and some of the relationships are different now. Lila's very personable and outgoing, and her interactions going back and interacting with some of her friends there, they're different.
Sure.
They're not bad. They're just not the same.
Yeah.
And so if we would have kept going back, she never would have been able to detach, never would have been able to buy into, and it's still a struggle. It's not like, you know, we've arrived and we've got it all figured out. It's kind of a daily, weekly evaluation of where we are and what God's trying to show us and what opportunities we have that we're looking at maybe selfishly and can readjust. And that's just all of us.
Yeah. Was it weird? I don't know how early on, because you were just a couple hours away, how early on you went back for the first time to see family or just be at the church service even. But like, we're coming up on going to be our first time going back to the States, you know, in almost 2 years since we left. And I'm a little nervous, man. I like, honestly, and I can't explain to people why fully. Like, I think the only reason I can like grasp in my head is because I know that my church isn't the same, and that's good. That's for the better. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I know that the town isn't even going to be the same, and I know that we're not the same. We're not the same people. God's changed us, and He's prepared us for this, and it just makes me nervous, because part of me just wants to slide in on a Sunday morning, right, like we used to back in the day, and even before deputation and all that, and just be, and it's just not that anymore. You know, I think it makes me nervous, but I think it'll be good to see everybody as well. Did you feel that at any point, your first time, or just, you know, down the road, where you're like, maybe not nervous, but it's like, no, we're not a part of this anymore. We were sent out, and yeah. I mean, I can relate. I'll prepare you. There's a new hotel by the river going up. What? Like when you're coming down the highway?
Yeah, just getting off of the.
You can't just build new buildings.
77 exchange. Yeah,
Isn't there like a new coffee shop too? It's not only Starbucks or some other.
There is another one up the road.
Dang.
Anyways, it's not a whole lot different though. They still move.
New Philly changes slowly.
They still move really slow through the traffic. It's like being in Columbus.
Oh, my dad said they got a harbor
off the highway, and you're
I
just like,
think,
man,
so
this
that's
is so
kind of
slow.
cool. You gotta love cheap tools.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know that there was a big one. I mean, that one's quite different, because we've been back a number of times. We haven't been to many services just because, you know, we have Sunday service, and
Right, of course.
I have to get back, and we have church as well. But there's been a few. I think the most recent being Easter, and it was good, but it was there were some weird things. It's always fun to see everybody that you love. There's new faces, and people will introduce themselves, and you're like, oh, hi, I'm nobody. You know?
Hey, I've been here forever. It's like, I don't know you. Like, oh, wow, okay.
Like it's weird.
Yeah.
But I think some of the stranger things, like we walked in and there was seats open in the middle. I was like, I've never sat here before in my life.
I know where I normally sit.
This is what the service sounds like from this spot. You know, it was just weird things like that. But it was I was never really nervous. But again, we've been back for events. We've been back and seen family. So it's been.
It wasn't as long as of a breakaway. Yeah.
Yeah. So our tearing off of the Band-Aid was much slower.
Sure.
And you kind of had to just tear it off and say, we're not going back. So
well, and even like I've had this weird conversation with Brooke before. I was like, listen, if we would have maybe if the opportunity would have presented itself, or maybe if we would have had to, because I know guys who would have stayed on the field longer before their first trip back, but couldn't. You know, like they had to go back, visa stuff or legal stuff. And I'm like, would you have even been ready? Would you have wanted to? And we were both kind of like, nah, I don't think I would have been ready. Like we've needed this time to fully, cut the cord and separate ourselves. And now as we're thinking about and preparing for that first trip back, that's not set in stone quite yet, at least at the recording of this, it's like, okay, this is home. And now we're starting to think about the difficulties of visiting America. Like we're excited, of course, but like, man, we got to pack up all our stuff. Judah's not going to have any toys. All of his friends are here. You start thinking about that stuff. Our, disciples and friends here are like, well, man, how long are you going to be gone? You're coming back, right? And so it's like, but we needed to get to that point before it was time for us to go back and visit. But
yeah, I think my kids being a little bit older, it's been nice to have the distance only 2 hours, but it's far enough that it's not easy to go back.
Yeah.
But we still have connections with family. We've had people come down and visit us, and that's been nice. We've gone to the zoo with some. Like we've got a nice zoo here, and that kind of stuff is fun.
Yeah.
There's a reason for people to come to Columbus, not just us.
Yeah, for sure.
So when they come down, and they'll say, "Hey, where are the Brauchers?"
Yeah, that's cool.
If we have time, it's nice. But
that's cool.
It's that stuff's kind of few and far between, but it's been nice. But yeah, so it's been interesting to watch that transition and have to let go at a different pace than you guys have. I think when you guys went, it was almost the mindset of, okay, well, the world's really stupid and upside down now, so we may never see Kale and Brooke.
Yeah, right.
Other than via technology again.
Sure, who knows?
That was I'm praying for you guys, thinking, holy cow, we just reverted back, 100 years in time as missions go. And
right, with COVID.
We sent them off and they might
not come back. Yeah. No, seriously, we felt
different mindset.
Yeah.
And we were just down the road. And it's just, now that gas is $5 a gallon.
You may never go.
We're not coming back. We may never see New Philly again.
Right. They're going to have to take up a love offering to bring you home, like when they buy Missionary plane tickets,
It's just crazy. Yeah. So
man,
that's kind of, it is interesting how things are the same, but they're very different for each of us.
It is weird how there's a lot of similarities. Of course, differences because it's obvious, but a lot of similarities too. So it's actually been good to be able to keep up with you and talk with you every couple months and see how each other's doing. Hey, let's do this, man. As we wrap up, I was thinking about talking more about like church planting in general in this one, but I really like how this conversation has went rather than just a how-to manual, because there is no how-to manual of church planting. We know what God says. And so we know that planting a church, you need disciples. You need people who get saved, and you need disciples. And there are easier ways. There are harder ways, and it all depends on where you go and the culture. And there isn't a how-to manual other than the Bible because there's so many variables. So it's like, we could say, I think you sharing your story is just like, this is what God's doing in my life. But considering your story is so much different than mine in regards to God revealing to you what he wanted you to do. I'd love for you to spend the last couple of minutes just talking to people who are in the same boat. Like, I feel like God wants me to do more, but I don't have he hasn't given me a vision of 10 years in the future, a burden. What should they, how do they just continue to take the next step and then by faith do whatever God asked them to do? Because that seems to be the pattern in your life, and that's what you did, and that's how you're at where you are now.
Yeah, I love the way that Troy generally puts this. I think Troy and I have a lot of similarities in our path and opportunities and things that have come along.
He's a secret engineer, isn't he? He was an engineer.
He's sharp. He really is. He says, man, I always want to put myself in a position to where I can say yes to God. Meaning, if there's classes I can take and there's an opportunity on the other side of that class, well, I have to take the class first so that God can ask me the question to use what he's invested in me, or my leadership has invested in me, to do the ministry work that's needed on the other side of it. So if he says, hey, can you go here? And I say, well, no, I can't. I'm not trained for any of those things. My leadership agrees, I'm not ready. So, or, another aspect of that would be, God wants me to do this, but I can't because there are massive financial burdens in my life.
Sure,
or
super practical.
Because there's sin in my life, and God's not even going to ask because whatever, So there's some very practical things there, but I would say just look for what God has provided you in some sort of path for growth at your church. Is there training and serving opportunities? Go do them.
Yeah.
Like, get involved, and when you're serving, you're learning at that point too. If you're being trained to use that to minister to people. And so if you're not ministering to people, well, it's all just going to end up making you prideful somewhere. Right?
Yeah. Amen.
It's being spiritually fat. If you're always consuming food physically, you just get bigger.
Yeah.
If you're not exercising to use it.
Don't be fat. Well, that's spiritually.
Don't be spiritual fathead, right?
Lazy fatty.
It's just going to be the necessary thing. So that's kind of been, in a nutshell, that's been my experience. Is if there's an opportunity to learn, go learn. If there's an opportunity to serve, go serve, because that's what you're there for. That's why you're part of the body.
Yeah.
And so if you just keep doing that over and over and over, well, you're going to learn new things and you're going to serve more. And somebody above you in leadership is going to notice and say, man, I just need somebody consistent and faithful in this role.
Amen.
That's the guy. He shows up. He doesn't know anything.
He's faithful and he's available. I can use that. That's what God says anyway. I can use that. I can equip him.
Absolutely. And so one of maybe this has been coming up a lot in conversations with different guys at the church, is there are a whole lot less leaps of faith in the Christian walk. What your Christian walk should look like is consistent little steps of faithfulness. Just keep doing the little things that God's already made clear that you should be doing, and do it wherever he asks you to do them. And if you just keep doing that, then he'll bring something along and say, hey, you've been faithful with little. The principle is all through Scripture.
Yeah. Now here's a big leap of faith, but it's because you've been doing these little.
Here's a big step.
Yeah.
And because I've proven myself as you've proven yourself, I won't let you down in this leap of faith.
Yeah.
But I needed you to do all of these things first. I needed you to prove that you didn't have to be the man. I needed you to prove that you would show up even when it wasn't fun, when no one said thank you,
submit
when whatever.
To authority. Yeah.
Just do what needs done because it needs done, because the body of Christ is worth it, because Christ is worth it.
Amen.
And then he'll give you opportunities of growth. And then you don't have to worry about telling your pastor, hey, man, I'm awesome.
Right.
You really should use me.
Well, it would be weird if God, if God called you to a big leap of faith and you've never really ever done any little, like you haven't consistently done anything, and you're like, man, God's calling me to move to China or something. Like, really? What have you done in following him every day consistently leading up to this point? That seems strange. God doesn't typically work like that.
Which is cool. And I think that brings it back to how, we can be so different in personality, and we can be so different in, we kind of got on the same path for growth at the same church at about the same time under the same leadership.
Right.
And God's speaking and moving and doing things very differently with each of us. You did, kind of say, hey, that's the thing I want to do. Your leadership said, okay, he's not ready. I'll get him ready.
Right.
And I'm just saying, well, I want to be ready for what?
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever God wants.
Yeah, and that's the differences in
still moving both of
personalities
us.
and my
he's still
leader,
moving
and I
both
was
of us
younger,
towards-
so I needed restrained, I needed tempered, and I needed patience and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You were a little bit
Absolutely.
older, and so it was like in personality, we already talked about that. You didn't necessarily have a goal, you just wanted to be made ready. And so like neither of those personalities are wrong as long as one takes the step of faith when God presents it, and the other submits to authority when they restrain them and say, you're not ready. It's like, as long as both are trusting God in their leadership, then it's like neither one of those is wrong. But do you think that, in taking that next step of faith and just doing what God has asked you to do, saying yes to God, all of those things that we talked about, it's really important to focus on where you're at. So I know with my personality, sometimes it would be like, okay, I'm here now, but I can't wait to get over there. And sometimes that's a younger guy thing too, because you're thinking about where you want to be. Maybe for you it was a little bit easier, but how important is it to be like, no, wherever God has you, when you say yes to God, focus on actually doing a good job of where he puts you, because he's also, he's training you, of course, and he's equipping you for that next thing. But he's also using you to do something he needs you to do.
Right. Each one has eternal value. And if he's equipping you to do the next thing and you don't do the current thing well, the question is, are you actually going to be ready? Have you actually proven faithfulness? Maybe that's just a very simplistic way of looking at it. But again, that's how my brain works. It doesn't do you any good to always be looking forward to that next thing.
Yeah.
If the current thing's not done well, if there's not consistent faithfulness in that current thing. One of the things that keeps coming up as far as like the patience of, waiting for the next thing and when it's time, and in studying the Gospel of Mark tells the story much quicker than everybody else. There's some really long chapters. Mark skips over the Christmas story. There's none of that kind of stuff.
He gets right down to
jumps
business.
right in and is like, we're doing stuff. We're calling disciples. We're doing miracles. We're going for it. There's a lot of words in there that are used like immediately this thing happened, and everything's just kind of seems to be rushed. But the one person who's never in a rush is Christ. Like he's just never in a hurry.
Yeah.
And yet, I've heard it said this way. He's never in a hurry, but he's always in time.
He's always right on time.
He's always on time, right? And then you get to, if you look at John 17, he got the work done.
Yeah.
He was never in a hurry, and he finished the work before he went to the cross.
Yeah.
Like he was done. So it's just, that's been very reassuring to me lately, and just some of my, I am impatient in some ways. There are some things that I struggle with that way. And that's been kind of the reassurance that, okay, show up and do what I have you to do today.
Mm-hmm.
And if you run out of time, then work on it tomorrow. And, because you can kill yourself for the ministry and work all the hours, and your family never have any time with you, and all of these other things that can go sideways, because there's just never going to run out of, you're never going to run out of things to do and people to help.
Yeah. Right.
But Jesus, he finished the whole work. We would maybe in our human understanding look at Judas and Peter and some of the things and say, well, maybe he could have put in a little bit more time. Maybe he was, but he's using me. Yeah. And I'm not a finished work. And so that's just been a theme that's coming up a lot recently, is just that patience of just keep at it.
Yeah.
And when you're done with that thing, he'll let you know you're done with that thing.
Yeah.
And because in some ways, my wife and I had a discussion. There was something that came up that we saw quite some time ago. And we're like, I think that's going to be a problem. And I won't go into detail what it was. We both saw it. We both knew it was going to be a problem. And I did not address it at that time because I had a full plate and whatever. And so it has finally come around and it's surfaced. And my wife said, do you think we could have avoided that if we would have dealt with it when we saw it? And I was like, man, that's a fantastic question, because I'm all about avoiding problems.
Sure.
But as I'm like thinking about it and praying about it and just, general study, working through things, God just kind of reassured me that there was not vision in place tied to this specific struggle. Mm-hmm. And there was not clarity for me. I wouldn't even have known how to address it. I would have come across legalistic.
Gotcha.
But now we as a church have vision and direction applied directly to this topic. Sure. And that vision and direction is coming straight from Scripture. This is what God's telling us to do, how he's telling us to do it. And now that we have this thing to address, yes, it's an issue. It's always been an issue, but now is the time to do it. Mm-hmm. Now is the time to deal with it, if that makes sense. And it was maybe hard not to know what the topic is, but good. I don't want to alienate anyone. And
no. Well, I like that you said, worry about doing today what God asked you to do today. I can relate to that because when we first got to the field in that first year was super slow. This year sped up much more. COVID, surprise, went completely away once the war started. That's neither here nor there. But we're finally outside of the major restrictions and just a lot of doors opened up in January of this year. And so I'm busy with a lot more ministry than I was the first year. The first year was mostly language study, and it was a lot of slow days and just grinding. And me thinking about what could I do to get something started just because I'm like, this ain't going fast enough for me. Right. And so, but eventually I kind of just, and I'm sure somebody talked to me and it was encouraging me through it, but it's kind of this idea that, we were all thinking that the rapture could happen any day, and it still can. But when COVID was hitting really hard, it's like, dang, man, maybe it's this year or next year. And so it's like, it still could be this year or next. Well, it's June now. It's probably not this year.
We're getting close.
Yeah. It could be next year. I'm not saying it's not. But when you're in that time, when you're really thinking that it could be now, and you're like, but there's so much that I need to do for the Lord, it's like really all you can do. I started thinking, well, what if God did come back while I was still learning the language, before I ever planted a church, maybe before I even, discipled anyone over here? Is that my fault? Like, if I just focused on doing what God asked me to do today, and when I went to bed and I assessed the day and be like, did I do what God asked me to do today? And the answer was yes. Well, then praise God. And then you go to sleep, and then you wake up the next day with the same perspective. And it doesn't matter what the results were if I every day just focused on doing what God asked me to do today. And I think that's where a guy like with my personality, who's always focused on the big picture and maybe the vision casting side, is you got to zoom in a little bit and just focus on it. It helps manage it, and it helps manage stress and anxiety a little bit and the burden. If you're just like, what does God ask me to do today? And it's like, well, for the first year, it was seeking men and learn the language. And I'm not fluent, but that's what I did every day. And like sometimes there was a Bible study, sometimes there was an opportunity to share the gospel. Most of the time I was sending a text message and then a bunch of hours of grammar study. And it wasn't fun, but it's what God asked me to do that day and for that whole year, So it's like I can totally relate to that because I think regardless of where you're at in your walk with God or where you're at in your training, it's just focusing what's your next step. And just focus on that and where you're at today, right? And then God, leave the rest to God.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's all very. It's very much rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
The big picture is critically important because you got to know where you're going.
Sure.
But if you hadn't put in a year of language study, and you have an opportunity with someone on the street, what do you do?
Exactly. If they don't speak English.
God has to, he's building a platform. He's building the foundation. He's setting things up with something stable tied to his, word and all of those things that he's built with you in New Philly.
Yeah.
And now there's some other things that are communication platform.
Sure.
Got to have a platform to stand on.
And it also goes back to, we're building men. We're not
Right.
building, when we're building churches, let's define church biblically. We're building men, people, okay?
Absolutely.
Men and women. We're not building physical buildings. Those are important tools, and there is a time for that. And you've even talked about how you've wrestled with the timetable of that. And it's still something your church needs at some point.
Yep.
But we're building men, and that's what ministry is. That is the foundation. That is, well, I mean, Christ is the foundation, of course. But like we're building a church that consists of men, and so that just takes time. You can't, if you expedite that, it will be done poorly. And you will see the quality. We're looking at quality over quantity here, at least when it comes to building the church. If we're just talking strictly evangelism, of course we want more people to get saved. But when we're talking about church planning in any culture or country, you got to focus on the men, and that just takes time.
Right. Yeah. So to remove the glamour from the position of lead pastor.
Sure.
And this is anywhere in the world, whatever field.
Mm-hmm.
My role as the pastor at Northside is to make sure that we know how to evangelize and that we are evangelizing, and that we know how to disciple and that we are discipling. That's 2022.
Yeah.
And should the Lord tarry, that's 2023, and that's 2024.
Yeah.
And that, we're just going to cycle those two things until we get it. And when we finally get it, we're going to keep cycling those two things. Like there's nothing else beyond that for the foundation of what we're doing. And it's not all that exciting, maybe to some, but if other people start to get that vision and they start to understand those things, and it's not just me saying it, and then we start to really do what we're supposed to do all along.
For sure.
But for now, to get started, you just got to keep talking about the same thing.
Yeah, well, and you have to. And it's kind of funny. I don't mean to keep beating the building analogy, but I think it's the best analogy because God uses it. In Ephesians, I mean, he uses it everywhere. 1 Corinthians 12. If you look at the guys who are in construction businesses, the guys who build foundations and dig footers and pour concrete, dude, they are, I don't want to call them grunts because not all of them are, but they are the laborers, the hard workers, and they don't have the sexy job. Sometimes it's like people, they love looking at renovation things on Pinterest or whatever, and like, ooh, look at this, the inside, the cosmetic stuff. And it's like, you can't do the cosmetic stuff, the fun stuff, the picking paint colors, if you didn't pour those footers right, and if you didn't dig those footers right. And so if we're, pulling the metaphor here, like sometimes the guys who God calls to do like church planting work that's like pioneering, we could call it. And sometimes we're just like, we're just those footer guys, man. We're out there doing the dirty work and tilling the soil. And some people are like, well, can't we just skip to the fun part? Can't we just start picking out paint? Like, no, we can't pick out paint. We haven't even laid the foundation yet. And but if you get everybody on the same vision and you get that foundation laid, eventually you do get to that part, and that is fun.
Right. Absolutely. Somebody's got to lay the plumbing, right?
Yeah, man. Someone's got to plumb.
You got to be able to bring the water in, but you also have to carry the waste out.
That's a good word.
That's not glamorous stuff, but
yeah, man.
It's necessary.
Well, hey, man, this has been good. We've went a little long, but I like it. Thanks for the conversation. Do you have anything incredibly inspiring to leave us with? I think the whole thing's been inspiring, but give us a one-line. Give us your best one-liner that I'm going to write in my Bible.
I don't know that I'm really good at that. I always steal Kenny Morgan's "You don't get the product without the process."
That's a
I
good
think
one.
that one's one that I go back to continually when I'm needing to be patient, and when somebody I'm leading needs to be patient, and I don't need to allow them to get me in a hurry for whatever they're being impatient about. So I'll just steal Kenny's line. I think you can't go wrong with that one.
There you go. That's good stuff, man. Thanks again, dude. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, there you go, guys. Season finale. Hope you liked season 3. I thought Matt would be a perfect interview for the last one because we go way back, and we're doing similar things, yet also not so similar things. And so I hope you took some stuff away, not even just about like stateside church planning. I think there was a lot of good stuff in there about that too, but specifically about Matt's story and how you can make sure that you're lining yourself up to take the next step. I like the quote he shared from Troy is, I always want to make sure that I'm lining myself up so that I can say yes to God. And practically, what does that mean? Taking classes, getting out of debt, renting a house instead of owning? I don't know. Everybody's different. What does that mean? How do you need to align your life so you can say yes to God? But I also kind of want to leave you with this question at the end of this episode, at the end of this season. Whatever you think God might have you to do, international missions, ministry, being a pastor, maybe you don't know, but you just want God to use you. You want to be used by God. Okay, what do you need to do today to prepare for that? That's the question that you should be asking yourself. In other words, what is the next step that I need to take today? Have I been complacent in my faith? Have I been stagnant? Have I been not seeking to grow? Or maybe I have been doing all that. Maybe you have been doing everything you're supposed to do. What's your next step? If we're always seeking to just take the next step in our faith, then we don't always need to be worrying so much about what God's going to do in 10 years. If we're just seeking to take the next step, and then what Matt shared is so perfect. If you just always consistently take the next little step, eventually God will ask you to take a big step, and it won't be that bad. But then you'll look back and be like, whoa, look how far we've come. Life is a series of small steps of faith, trusting God. And if you do that for the consistency of your life, there will be a few big steps that he asks you to take occasionally. And you'll already have built up this history of trusting God. And so it will still be hard, but it won't be as hard because you know that God will come through. So what's your next step in trusting God? Do you want to be a foreign missionary? Do you want to be a pastor? Do you just simply want to be used by God in whatever way, whatever capacity he sees fit? What's your next step? What do you need to do? How do you need to align your life so that you can always say yes to God, so that he can use you, and so that you can be a vessel of honor used by the King to do his work? I hope you guys enjoyed this episode in this season of Missionary Roundtable. Hopefully, we'll be able to do the same thing again next summer, God willing. But for now, thank you guys so much for consistently listening every week. If you haven't heard them all, go back and listen to the other seasons. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend, share it on social media or something. Hopefully we can help some people out and we can all learn some stuff about how to be better ministers of the gospel together. Thank you guys so much. And until next time, God bless.
Thanks for listening. Please rate and subscribe and share us on social media. Also, please make sure to check out our other podcast, Theology Roundtable, at theologyroundtable.com.